Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Resistance Recovery Book Club. This is episode 6, and this week we're being bold. We call it bold. and my friend and I, the Reverend Andy Stinson, who you've all met before, who is a great friend and supporter of Resistance Recovery and the Liberation Institute and Rockland Recovery Treatment Center. Can't say enough about the support he gives me. He has agreed to join me in a discussion of a book called The Coronavirus Pandemic, Anthroposophical Perspectives by Judith Von Halle'S. And so if you are expecting a highly charged political conversation about the origins of COVID and the vaccine, we're probably going to disappoint you. But if you want to get into some esoteric speculation about this virus, then this might be of interest. It is anthroposophical, so it's kind of a technical jargon, if you will, but I think a lot of you will appreciate what Judith has to say. Before we start, just a few words about Judith Von Halle'S. She is an anthroposophist, she's an architect, she's German, and what makes her very, very unusual is she is a stigmatic. So she has had the stigma for some years. If you don't know what
the only recorded non-Catholic, is that true?
I've read of others.
I have too, but
there are very few non-Catholic stigmatics. And if you don't know what a stigmatic is, it means that she actually has the wounds of Christ in her palms, feet, forehead, and side. They are not always open. They open and they close. When I think this is correct, I hope I'm not wrong, but when they are open, she has spirit vision of the events of Palestine 2,000 years ago, right down to being able to comprehend Aramaic. If this sounds completely wild to you, it's because it's completely wild.
Yes.
I believe the Catholic Church has only 300 official recorded cases.
I think 500 claimed, something like that.
Yeah.
And the first being Assisi, being Francis. Yeah.
Is that official or is that just legendary?
I don't know, but it comes up everywhere I read that it's attributed that way, that it's to Francis, but I don't know if that's true.
So other than Francis, some of the famous stigmatics are Padre Pio of the 20th century, who had all kinds of paranormal phenomena surrounding him, all the way down to bilocation, meaning being in two places at once. And the one I think resembles Judith Von Halle'S quite a bit is Catherine Emmerich, who was bedridden, but also had this vision. So Von Halle'S is controversial in the anthroposophical world. So she has detractors. There are some that say that we don't need to really unpack this, but that stigmata is atavistic. It's a older spiritual condition, and that it's not appropriate to the anthroposophical path of training, or it would never occur during that. There are other things that she has said in her visions that contradict Rudolf Steiner in some small ways that some people make a lot out of. And then on the other hand, she has her defenders. Unfortunately, her detractors are from what's called the Vorstand. So they're kind of like the mucky mucks of anthroposophy. Needless to say, I'm on the Von Hall side of Von Hall camp, if you will. So with that,
and I mean, and just to kind of throw my piece in, I'm not, I've got no dog in this fight. But one of the fascinating things to me is the continued revelation that kind of comes out. I mean, the notion of, you know, mystics, and particularly the notion of continuing revelation, and the notion of you know, mystical messages for particular times in particular ways, are, you know, the entire 2,000 years of Christianity are littered with it. And if you either can accept that or not accept that, but you know, but for me, I highly accept that. And I think that and so I'm, you know, for somebody like Von Hall, that this is, to me, it's like, I think it's fascinating to lean into this and to just see what does, you know, what does she have to say, not necessarily say that, you know, we don't have to get kind of guruistic about the whole thing, but we can say like, what, you know, there's exceptional things happening here. And so so we ignore these things. I think, you know, we can get all, you know, dogmatic and all kind of staunch about it, but we can also just kind of check them out. And that's kind of, I come at this as a tourist. I'm, you know, I'm not an anthroposophist. I don't, you know, but there's, you know, in my reading, there's some fantastic truths here. I think that she plumbs into kind of the, you know, what we might call the war behind the war, you know, the battle behind the battle of what's going on a spiritual level with some of this stuff. And you can accept it or not, but it to me, much of it's starting to, you know, rings really, really true. So you know, I think it's cool, you know, because that's part of this conversation that we can have, is that you know, this is much, Piers, this is much more your wheelhouse than mine. But at the same time, there's this I think, you know, there's a tremendous beauty and tremendous truth coming through what she's saying. I think, regardless of what where you come down on the wider virtue of it. So I was excited to read this.
yeah, and I'm in essential agreement with everything you just said. Some of our listeners might be interested to know that in Protestant denominations, there's often, many of them say there's no new revelation outside of the Bible, that all the book was closed then. And so this stuff is necessarily off the mark. So just for the record. So where do you think we should start?
Well, I think I would start with why she wrote the book to begin with, because I think that's an interesting, you know, she didn't necessarily want to write this. It was really kind of a by popular demand. And that, I think, you know, elicits an interesting, you know, an interesting voice from somebody. You know, it's like people, you know, when COVID kicked off in March of last year, by May, she was getting hounded with folks who were, you know, what do we make of this? So she's kind of become a voice and so the fact that she you know, that she didn't say, here's what I think, you know, it was much more really a response. And she just wanted to write a couple letters, and it was actually her publisher that made her turn this into a book. So to me, I think, you know, starting with the whys of why some people do stuff is an interesting, and I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but I thought that alone began to be like, that was my first kind of that with this, is that she didn't bring this, you know, she's not like, you know, you know, she wasn't kind of beating her own chest over this. It was really it's really kind of, you get that. And I think you really, in reading it, you get this kind of sense of, you know, this is being drawn out of her. This isn't necessarily be her like, this is what I think the world should do, kind of thing.
Yeah, and she's certainly not strident.
Right.
In fact, she starts out by pointing out that there are very polarized camps in all of this, and that ultimately that's not really helping anything.
Right.
Well, I think that's, you know, true on many levels.
Yeah. And I think, you know, that's probably one of her deeper points in the whole thing, is that, she begins to map out how the oppositional all the oppositional stuff that COVID has drawn out of the world, whether it's the red blue divide, whether it's the vaccine anti-vax divide, whether it's that all of these are I mean, she calls it the great distraction, all right? I mean that, or there's this way in which that it's co-opting all of these deeper spiritual forces that really need to come to the fore to heal us and heal heal the world and heal this stuff. And so I thought that was a brilliant observation right out of the gate. Was just was kind of so she solidly kind of pole vaults over the polarization of this thing immediately.
Yeah. And so that is a good place to start, because I think to frame this, we're going to have like a few sort of anthroposophical ideas that frame the thing. And one of them is that in this time that we're living in, forming community is paramount. However, it cannot be based on any kind of tribalism or any kind of blood relation, which these were appropriate forms of community in earlier times. But now we're being called to form community out of what she calls the I.
Right.
So this is out of the unique spiritual individuality of each one of us. Mm-hmm. And we need to be able to I meet I. And so this is not it's not a group think. And in fact, she would be, or the anthropops would be similar to Jung in saying that at this time, if you were to go back into that group mentality, it's actually regressive.
Right.
And a lot of people are tempted to do it because of fear.
Mm-hmm. Right. And yeah, I would call it, like, from my perspective, I think one of the ways I've described it is just the organization around affinity groups, that we have a common love, and that I seeks I, and I recognizes I, because of the fact that, we have a common love in this. We have a common, there are things that we have common values set. My guy Swedenborg would talk about it as heavenly communities, that we're called to build these communities that are around these heavenly loves, these loves for the good. What's her phrase that she keeps coming back to again and again, which I just fell in love with, which I'm sure is probably a Steinerism, but where she says the good, the true, and the beautiful, I think. Is that it?
Yeah. That's Plato.
Yeah. But that idea of kind of continuing to come back to that. And that was, and that so struck me because, when this whole thing kicked off, I really felt like, for me, I felt like God gave me a word out of this, really, like around the end of March. I really felt like I was spoken to, and it was just the one line from Dostoevsky, which is, beauty will save the world. And I really felt, I woke with that. Like I woke up one morning with that, just like as if somebody had just, shoved it into my consciousness. And it's been kind of my ruling kind of guidepost for this whole thing, is that, regardless of what we're doing and where we're doing it, we have to incorporate the beautiful. If the beautiful isn't a part of it, don't touch it. Don't, because you're off the mark. Like it's and as much as that sounds like, kind of so, it's so hippy dippy, airy fairy in some way, but it actually is the great sword against, and the great defense shield against the fear that would bring us back into that tribalism. And, and she kind of hammers on that right out of the gate, like, that this is like that all of the stuff is a distraction to take us away from, the good, the true, and the beautiful. And that really resonated with me, because it felt like it was so much of what I had gotten in my own spiritual practice and my own my own journey. So I felt really That was the first, I perked moment. It's, started there, like that perked me up. I'm like, oh, okay, this is not going to be a polemic about, whether the Pfizer vaccine is better than the Moderna vaccine or something.
Right. Well, and I mean, on a very prosaic level, your point is so well taken, because if anything the pandemic has done is it's cast a spell of, or a shadow of ugly over so much. Yeah. Well, so on that point, she really makes a big issue about truth, lies, and the spirit behind lying, who in the anthroposophical world would be the spirit of Ahriman. And Ahriman in the Bible, anthroposophists make a distinction between Lucifer and Satan, and Ahriman is often imagined to be Satan. And Ahriman is he is the father of lies, because his core lie is that there is no spirit. Right.
The lie of materialism.
That's it. And the lie of materialism is is actually making us vulnerable to viruses. Mm-hmm. This one in particular.
Yep.
So that's a bit of
yeah, I have the quote right here. She says, and according to my knowledge, the cause of this, she's talking about the virus, is materialism, which has spread out over the entire earth, and especially in humanity's predominantly materialistic way of thinking.
Yes.
And I love that. I love that emphasis on thinking, because I thought that was really, really important. It's not like materialism, like I want more stuff but it's this way of thinking, and if you think about vaccine, like I mean, people are like, I just had a call this morning, and people are so transfixed with getting their jab, and and it's like, think about this. You're talking about an inert little piece of like, material stuff that is now going to make you bulletproof and safe. And, I mean, the whole Jesus quote of, where is your faith, that comes to me, on that, because it's like, man, it looks like their faith is in a little piece of material and they're thinking that way. And that's what gets me. That's what I thought was so powerful about her observation, is it's not just materialism as like because we all like stuff, but it's the way of thinking about the fact that material is our salvation. Like that our salvation is in the material.
Yeah. So one of the things that she does is so in anthroposophy, we have, they're certainly not alone in this, but they have a notion of the evolution of consciousness. And so the human being is actually evolving through time. And we are now in what she calls, or what Steiner called, the time of the consciousness soul. So this is the sort of awakening up to the I. And prior to this was what was called the intellectual soul, when we were coming into our own mentally. And what she shows in the book, which I found fascinating, is she shows how different kinds of plagues that affected human beings followed the development of the human being. So if we go back far enough with leprosy, that actually involved touch. In order for that to pass, it was touch. And then she moved into various kinds of bacterias.
Yeah, and TB.
And it was either tainted food or water or liquid droplets. And in the anthroposophical world, the liquid element pertains to the development of what you would call the soul, because it's a fluid realm.
Right.
But then she says, as we've gotten to this point, now it is in the realm of air. And she even shows that viruses are relatively modern.
Right.
And she, so so if you were an alchemist, all of this would make sense because we're relating the element of air to the phenomena of thinking. It's an immaterial or a airy kind of thing.
Yeah. Eh,
Um,
yeah. And if you think about it, like like one of the kind of the spiritual correspondences, the kind of the symbolism behind that you often find that like one of the ways it's described is when that Jesus talks about kind of the birds of the air. One of the ways that gets interpreted esoterically is he's talking about the thoughts that fly through our consciousness. So you can think about that in the sense of like, okay, you've got this big thinking world, and then within your big thinking world, and then you've got these things that have life and that they move through it, and those are our thoughts. And so so I really appreciated that kind of symbolism, because I think it's a solidly rooted kind of framework of and Swedenborg's framework as well. So it's really it's because it's really, I mean, it's, when people heard you kind of laying that out, I'm like, I can see on the other side, like people's like, oh man, what am I into? But at the same time, there's like, these are deep, I mean, these are deeply present, and they're deeply present, cross culturally. They're deeply present, across time. The power of these images and the power of this. So that whole notion that you're talking about her saying this is really a fight for the mind, about this is really a fight how we think about stuff. Again, really, like, and it's so right, because we are in an information age. Like, that's the
yeah,
reality. This is,
that's right.
the fight is Google. The fight is the fact that things fly in, information flies so fast.
And so does falsehood.
Right. Exactly.
And so what's hard for a lot of contemporary thinkers to understand is that Steiner believed that thinking was not just the property of your head. So it's not this little thing that I do and you're encased in yours. Math might be a better way of understanding it. If we started talking about the Pythagorean theorem, we would be both talking about these same entities that in some way really exist, and that we can participate in their truth and communicate them. And that thinking in an anthroposophical world, it's a way of, it's a dimension of reality that is inherent in the properties of the world. So there's a thought world around nature, there's a thought world around weather, there's a thought world around, all these things. And of course, there's room for error and all that. And so what she's saying is that when you cannot acknowledge or apprehend or work with the spiritual reality of thought, when you falsify it into just being some shadowy thing that you do in your head,
Right.
that's a kind of materialism.
Right.
Right. Of course, this materialism would be that consciousness is just a secretion or a byproduct of what's going on in my brain.
Right. And it's the power of it's the power of the idea, to think of it that way, is that, like the great quote, nothing can stop an idea whose time has come. This idea that, that this notion that these movements, these ideas, these truths have a time in which they come, they're coming into us. And they also have kind of the, her quote over here, well beyond previous epochs, when such things were appropriate, maintain a group soul and a group soul attitude, that in these intellectually pandemic associations of people, self and group, needs speak of a corrupted soul activity that has not been conquered by the I. And I think there she kind of lays out, like, that's a little bit of a layout of her whole contention about this whole thing. Like, there's this corrupted soul activity that's going on that we have not got our arms around, that we have not, like, we're not there, and it's getting the better of us, I think, is a little bit of her case.
Oh, it's a big part. Yes.
Yeah.
So we are not coming into our I forces, because.
Can you say more about that? Because she launches into the assumption of we know what that is in the book. And it took me a little while and I think for our conversation to be helpful, because I found it, just for me personally, I found it really helpful, because it is very much how I understand our development as people is to come, because so much, I think so many different, kind of world's idea systems, belief systems, be it, Buddhism, be it, Islam, be it that there's this way of, like, the transcendence of the self into kind of some sort of nirvana, blissy kind of nice state. But this is really the solidification of the self in a way that it is the true definition, I think, of Christian in a way, which is the idea of being little Christ, and that we're really, that this is about building character, and this is very much always been my belief. It's certainly was Swedenborg's belief. Like, he really believes we're not, we don't come through this world, that the whole point of this world is to be a seminary for heaven, like, that we're being formed and we're being shaped and we're being molded and we're being tempered and we're being created. And that creation that is in this world is also to give birth, to give birth to the next one. So there's a lot of, like, there's kind of a lot on the line here, and it's not about just like getting over it. It's the opposite of kind of the Gnostic idea of, like, what's the quickest way out of this place so that I can reunite with the light. But it's really this, how do I create, how do I permit myself to be formed? How am I formed? So that how do I bind together with, with my heavenly community in this place, to be able to bring heaven into this world so that it can be a vessel for goodness in this world. I found that very much a part of her understanding around that I. So I just, stole your thunder, but there's a great point just in the whole thing to understand, like, this is a valid direction to be going. If you think you're forming somebody, you are, like that.
Well, so in anthroposophy, the I, which is your spiritual identity, your essence, is only gradually, over long, vast periods of time, incarnating into the body. So the Christian gesture is of the spirit coming down into the body. And anthroposophy believes in reincarnation, so this is happening successively. People are at different places with it, but everyone's generally moving in a direction, and there are forces of hindrance that are trying to block this every step of the way. The forces of hindrance are how we develop capacities. So on some level, we have to encounter evil in order to develop these capacities.
Right.
So it really is about the I incarnating. Now, we're far from being what Steiner calls spirit man, when the I has come down and he's worked over the soul and what's called the etheric body, and right down to the physical body.
Yep.
That'll happen in the distance.
Such an orthodox idea. I mean,
God became man so man could become God. That's right.
Exactly. It's so completely, like, I mean, what I find so fascinating is it's not as if, this is an ancient part of the Christian tradition.
Yeah, it's not really theosophical or anything like that.
Right.
So, the way Steiner would put it is he would say humanity's destiny, or what we're moving towards. I can just hear, I can hear anthroposophists quibbling with me because I'm not being really exact, is that we are supposed to become the 10th hierarchy. So there's 9 hierarchies of angels above us, and we are evolving into the 10th one. And that means that we are meant to be beings of freedom and love, with the understanding that real love can never have any element of coercion. It has to be,
fully voluntary.
yeah, you have to be, in a sense, as Steiner would say, choosing your own motives. No sense of inner compulsion. So what's happening now is that there is a very powerful evil force in the world that is trying to prevent the I from realizing its vocation. And that force is another type of evil, which she calls the Asuric, or Steiner called it that. And the Asuric force is to prevent the I from incarnating. And so she relates this to these lies. So Ahriman is very interesting with anthroposophy, because there's also Luciferic evil, and these forms of evil are actually quite different from one another. But when one of them does their work, it creates an opportunity for the other one to come in. And so what's going on with Ahriman is that we have been subjected to this materialism. We have an Ahrimanic genius inside of us that allows us to pursue technology, and what Steiner would say is human beings now, their genius for technology is actually outstripping their moral development. Right. So hence we spend, we use our genius on weapons and surveillance. And what's happening, I just want to read something. If we can go to page 50.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah. But just on that point, that this is what she says about on page 45 about exactly that, about what this is opening up. She says, the infection with the virus steers the I slumbering person. So basically, the person just going through their day, not aware of their I, the I slumbering person's intention back to the purely material and back to the physical processes, and it reaffirms his or her already biased materialistic worldview. And so it impacts a spiritual, on a sub-level, on a sub-sensory level, spiritual impulse on the physical in the human soul. And I just loved that, because I thought I'm like, that's because all you got to do is, turn on any media, talk to anybody, and that's just kind of that's just kind of stumbling their way through this. And like, you see that at work, that it keeps steering them back to, like, oh, you can get your vaccine over here, or you can, put on another mask over here, or everything steering them towards the material. And that in that, it's kind of opens up this impulse to stay rooted in the physical and to not think of higher things.
Well, and also Ahriman is a being of fear.
Right, exactly. And instill fear. Yeah.
It instills fear. So there's like,
and him hit that limbic part of the brain. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what she's really saying has got several prongs. One is our vulnerability to the virus to begin with is a function of materialism. Our strategies for coping with the virus are exclusively materialistic. And this spiritual destiny that we've been charged with to form community out of our I now is being completely compromised because we're full of fear, and we're afraid of our neighbors. and we're falling into groupthink depending on how you fall on these issues of vax, no vax, origin of the virus, so on and so forth.
Yeah. And as you were talking about before, we're falling into groupthink that is the opposite of our spiritual, our, our heavenly community. It's really our hellish community. We're rallying with the people that hold the same fears as we do. We're rallying with the people that hold the same prejudices we do. We're rallying with the people that, that circle the wagons the same way we circle the wagon. I mean, we're all of this, it's good. It bringing us right in the wrong direction, in the opposite direction of our kind of heavenly selves, of our more, of our wider connection to community.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. So on page 50, just to build on that, we'll get to the sort of dynamic of how this is working. She writes, I'll read for a little bit. She says, what is going on here? First of all, the fixed ideas of materialism eventually put the lungs in this sclerotic situation. So she's talking about, that people that get COVID, they get this sort of hardening of the tissue in the lungs. Furthermore, today's kind of materialism leads to obsessive thoughts that force people to become addicted to the materialistic worldview. I found that very interesting because I think we are prone to these obsessive thoughts the more we are filled with fear and anxiety.
Absolutely.
So OCD is an extreme form of this, but I have this fear for my children. And if I don't line up all the soup cans just so, something bad is going to happen to them.
Right. Absolutely.
The I is undermined, compelled by its rigid, fearful intellectual soul that has been abandoned by its higher spirit through materialism. And then she goes on and says, a life of free thinking is no longer possible. Just as the lungs, when they become stiff and no longer pass oxygen onto the blood, can no longer dynamically relate to the outer world.
And this is where it gets good. Yeah.
Yeah, it really does. The human being basically breathes in his own fixed ideas. Wow.
Like wearing a mask, but breathing in your own, your own exhaust. Like it's your own. I mean, it's a physical manifestation of what's actually spiritually happening.
Yeah, and it's all my little group that share these ideas, which causes his breathing organ to become rigid. If the thought ether is no longer permeated by reality, the air breathed in by us will consist exclusively of mere chemical gas. So there we are back in that sort of alchemical world, that the air in a way is the bearer of truth, prana or pneuma, spirit.
And how much of the whole social media landscape now has just become echo chamber? I mean, that's essentially what she's talking about, is that, we breathe in our own fixed ideas. We go to our social media page to find people who reinforce the things that we believe. And the moment we find somebody who doesn't believe what we believe, woe betide them.
That's right.
The flaming begins. And so it's this, I mean, it's a really beautiful image of what we can see going on all over the place.
Instead of being the bearer of supersensory living forces, so in yoga, that would be prana, it will become the bearer of subsensory impulses in the form of damaging material particles. The physical breath of life, previously the guarantor of human life on earth, would in this way become a potential menace to life. The cause is I-benumbed thinking. What a phrase. I-benumbed thinking. The opposite of what happens when the human being uses what Rudolf Steiner characterizes as the selfless I sense. So the higher I is by its very nature selfless. And that's to be contrasted with not so, egoism is more of a neutral term. I think a more appropriate one would be egotism,
Mhm.
which is the idea that I can take credit for myself. I can
That I'm the
take credit
center of
for
the
things
world.
I shouldn't take credit for,
Right.
and that I must have things to be okay.
Right.
And so now she's, she'll take us deep into Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, she's skipping ahead a bit, but she talks to, like, she said, then, feeling the awareness that our suffering is among the most valuable experiences in this incarnation, for it gives us the opportunity for real insight into the purpose of incarnation. And so she kind of immediately, or she then kind of pivots from this notion of, what's the problem is that we're breathing in our own fixed ideas. We're breathing in our own, we're stultifying ourselves on these, on our own thought. And that what breaks us out of that is actually our suffering. What actually breaks us out of that is the fact that we're going to lift heavy things. We're going to do hard things. And that's going to, I'll read the whole paragraph because I think it's worth it. It's, for this reason, there is nothing to fear. On the contrary, and pardon the straightforwardness, the eventual prospect of death by COVID-19 and preceding suffering should also not particularly burden us. For compared to other ways of suffering before crossing the threshold, as a rule, it is limited to several days. Apart from this, the steps we take on our psychical path of inner development awakens with the awareness of our suffering is among the most valuable experiences of this incarnation. She goes on, when fear grips us, let's look at Christ. Why is it said that he was the first to rise from the dead? Because we ourselves are the second ones to whom this is given. If we contemplate the Easter depiction of the Eisenheim altar, which I'm not familiar with, it can call upon our souls. See, human being, that is your gift. I'm like, she gets very preachy here. I appreciate that, as as a preacher. But this real call to arms of, like, of lift up, she talks about the altar, and the whole purpose of the altar is often that we lift our gaze, that we look up to it. And, that this notion of, we contemplate the Easter depiction, we contemplate, our own, mortality and resurrection through this. And that it puts us, and then immediately that is the silver bullet to our materialism. That the moment we step into that sphere, all the materialism just, it melts like wax, because it's now exposed to a heat that it just can't hold. Like, it's this and so, this whole idea, I mean, it's just so beautiful, because I mean, you look at my bookshelf in the back, like, if I was really an old school congregational minister, one of those shelves would have a skull on it, because part of your job was to keep before you all the time your mortality. And that one of the ways you did that is and it wasn't a pretend skull, it was an actual somebody's skull. And you'd spend a little time with it. You'd contemplate it. You'd look at it. You'd be like, that was somebody's head. And you would, this way of going into that fear, so that the whole draw towards materialism, it loses its punch, and you're actually drawn into the spiritual thinking of things. And I really loved that invitation, because it's at the heart of the Christian tradition. It's right at the center of it.
Yeah, and it's really big in Orthodoxy, where they,
Right.
what are they called? Charnel houses? Is that what?
Yeah.
So that all the monks' skulls are in one place, and you
Yep.
can go there and contemplate.
Yeah.
So one of the things that she's saying is happening now is that these acerric forces are so strong right now because it's trying to prevent the spiritual event of our time, which is what Steiner called the reappearance of the Christ in the etheric, okay? And Orthodox Christians would call that the second coming.
Mm-hmm.
So
Swedenborgians would as well, actually. That they would.
Swedenborg would as well?
Swedenborg was as well, yeah. He said this, the second coming is not a physical event. It is the dwelling of Christ consciousness within humanity. Like that of the way of Christ within human beings.
So for Steiner, this starts happening in 1933, and it can happen in many ways, but it actually can happen with people having a perception of the Christ in the etheric, which biblically Steiner would say is coming in clouds. That's the image. So another person I've interviewed, Howard Storm, congregational minister who had a profound near-death experience. He didn't know this until I interviewed him, which I found quite interesting. He was approached, somehow this publishing house found out about him, and called Clairview, and it's an imprint of Steiner books. And they encountered him because his experience of the risen Christ and the near-death experience, and even some things that happened to him after he came back, is exactly what Steiner said was going to be happening. And he didn't even know that was why he was approached until I told him. But so this is going to be happening to people increasingly, and it's not always that dramatic, but it often happens through near-death experiences, suffering, and the materialism is geared towards preventing it from happening. And to experience the Christ in the etheric is to experience a real foretaste or vivification, I'm sure the anthropops are objecting to me right now, of the I. So there's a relationship between the Christ and the I that's meant to happen in this time, and all of this stuff in a spiritual sense is to prevent that.
Right. The one of the ways it's been described from my stuff is that we have the honest, the full experience of being what is called distinguishably one, that we are completely and utterly distinguishable from all of everyone else and everything else in creation. We are thoroughly and wholly. What's that?
As individuals.
As individuals.
Yes.
And so as an individual, we are full, and we are completely and utterly connected to the whole. We completely understand ourselves as a part of the one, but it's not this like, and our self melts away kind of thing, but it's this sense of we're thoroughly distinguishable. We can truly see, if you think about it as the mosaic of glass, we can, of a stained glass window, you can see our glass is distinguishable in that, and we know it and it's unique to us, and we know it in the whole, and that is the experience of being in that state of that's the way I've heard it described before
by Swedenborg
and by other people, by folks that have read Swedenborg.
That's future show, folks. Steiner and Swedenborg. So to talk about the Christ stuff, I just thought we could go for a second to page, it's the bottom of 77 on to 78.
Oh yeah, that's great.
And I'll just start with that last word on page 77. Allow me to give you this as the greatest consolation, as the strongest ray of hope in the present situation. The individual person holds the world's fate in his hands. This is the gift of Christ, who sees the individual I as a deity, who treats it as a deity. We are free beings, and therefore our relationship to the world is in our own hands, in all times and at every moment. Spiritual life must become a reality in our hearts and thereby in our higher consciousness. We must develop a feeling in our souls for the true, the beautiful, and the good that resides in this spiritual life.
So good.
Yeah, so they're very much like other, like I keep thinking of the Orthodox who say that, you know, you need a few righteous human beings,
right?
to
And
save
she
the
said,
world, to transform the world.
right, and she says that too. Like she says that, you know, like the great question, you know, to ask on the same page, I think, you know, what is it that I as one person can do to influence world events? And the answer is everything. If people could only see with physical eyes the effect on the macros and micro context that the decision and implementation to consistently practice only one meditation by a single person, then probably no one would hesitate to undertake such an exercise themselves. You know,
Yeah,
and that's again, that's very orthodox.
yeah,
This notion of the kind of that we don't, you know, it's the crystalline. I think of it as the crystalline structure of things. You know, it's not that you know, if you think about a super saturated, uh, um, you know, solution, you know, for that solution to go from, you know, to change states, to go from liquid to solid, it doesn't need everything there to all the crystalline structure to change. It just needs one. And that once one changes, which is the real transformation point, all of the everything else changes. That everything, all the others repeat very, you know, with great power. And I think, you know, that's kind of that's always a physical example, I think, of the power of what that we contain to change the world around us and to change the affect of things. And we all see it. Like, you know, when a jerk walks into the room, you can feel the world change. And when somebody that you love walks into the room, you can feel like the power of that. And they don't even have to do anything or say anything. And then you take that intention that we have and you focus that and blast it into the world in a real powerful, in a real way. You know, she's saying that, we are fooled into thinking. And again, this is the power of the materialist mindset, is we're fooled into thinking we're powerless to affect these things
right. It's a lie.
when it's all a lie. Like that's the great lie. Like that is the great lie.
Well, I would imagine as a minister, I mean, I think I've probably the few times I've worshiped with you, I've noticed this, that depending on what's going on in that little constellation of people in the church that morning or that event, that the prayer can take on completely different quality depending on the intention and presence or absence of people. So it's not like these are, you know, it's just like your example about the jerk coming in the room. These aren't ideas that are really that abstract.
Right.
It's like, it's more about stepping in more confidently into what you've already experienced.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And trusting that, I think she goes on to say at some place, I'm not sure I have a bookmark, but where she talks about it as, I can't remember the word she uses, but what the word I would use that I translated is kind of the logos of like that, the really real, and kind of that, what she's saying is that we think this material stuff is the really real, and that when we get into the mindset that the material stuff is the really real, we're lost. Like that's the trap. But what we understand is that, that when the jerk comes in the room and the atmosphere changes, or when the beloved person comes into the room and the atmosphere changes, that's the really real. Like that's the because that experience has been going on since people started banging rocks together. You know, that experience has been going on. That's an eternal experience for human beings. And that's the power of the eternal, that when we tap into that. And so, as you say, we swim in it all the time. But I mean, I love what you said, like that idea of just truly living and trusting into it, like leaning into that, with real power and intention, rather than, you know, and again, I think what she maps out really well, without the distraction of the wider world, because she talks about all of these things as just constantly ginning up distraction for us, or to be able to live in that place, you know, or to be able to spend more time in that place.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Well, I mean, I feel like we've done quite a bit of justice to this.
There's one thing I wanted to touch on that hasn't come out on page 93. She talks about something that I think that has been just a huge part of what I think is going on, where she, you know, her line is just this: everything is upside down. And the whole idea of inversion that we have going on right now, all of the different inversions that we're seeing go on, that you know, that in order to be healthy, you need to lock yourself away from sunlight with and other people, and you know, and not exercise, and not, like, all the things that we think about that, you know, normally, you know, like, oh, you want to be healthy, well, get some sunshine, go for a walk, you know, like all the things, you know, just all the opposites that we're encountering right now, of on deep levels too, whether you know, depending on, you know, how you encounter the whole gender thing, how you encounter the whole, like, just there's this big inversion that's going on. And she talks about that, that I thought was, and that there's this, you know, that where she's quoting, you know, Mephistopheles, you know, that you know, to turn the lowest into the highest, to be sure, since we escaped from the fiery prison there to excessive power in the freer air, and an open mystery yet well concealed, and not late to the people revealed. You know, indeed, everything is upside down. It says, this is the insidious plan. The well-kept secret is that thoroughly Christian values, ideals, motives, conscious actions, and energies be misused for purely physical aspects of sensory life.
Yeah.
Like, holy smoke, like, there it is. Like, I mean, like, to me, like that, like, that's my, like, as a pastor, like, I feel like that's my fight, you know, like, you know, oh, I really need help with my prayer life. Well, why? So I can get a BMW, you know, like, whatever. Like, I mean, it's just this complete, you know, kind of misusing of that, which is just such a lie. Not only is a lie, but man, it's a good trick. You know, it's a really slicky boy maneuver to get people thinking like that, you know, to misuse these things.
And what Steiner says is, it can actually, it's not, you know, it's not confined to not realizing this I thing. It can also go to the point of becoming subhuman.
Oh yeah.
And that, you know, that's something that I feel that I'm seeing in my work with addicts all the time now, is that they're not, it's just getting so bad and so depraved, and the moral qualities, the air, if you will, that they're breathing is taking people down to the level of mere appetite, for sure. But then you have to ask yourself about some of these appetites.
Right.
Because these aren't the appetites of shelter and food and warmth,
right,
and human.
They're not even appetites of preservation. They're actually,
they're not
appetites
even
of exploitation. I mean, they're appetites of a dominion and avarice. Like that's, I mean, their appetites of like, I want to dominate something and I want to have all the things for myself. Like, I mean, they're truly diabolical and truly evil appetites. I mean, I see it as well. I mean,
Yeah.
I just, I mean, I know it's like, God, I sound like such a pastor when I say this stuff, but like, I just can't not, but I mean, I still like, I've probably mentioned it half a dozen times this year, but I just think the image of, Cardi B's song WAP being lauded on national public radio. Okay, not exactly the most, hip hop cutting edge kind of thing, but that song being lauded as the song of the year for 2020 is such a, I mean, to me, that's a, I don't know if you know the song, but I mean, it's
Oh,
probably, well, I mean, it's WAP stands for wet ass pussy. And it's this song that is just, and the thing about the song that crosses the line is because we all, I grew up with sexualization in music. I love Prince. Like, I'm not talking about any of that because this isn't about sexualization. This is what the difference. I've talked about this a bunch, and I really passionately believe it, is the difference that Cardi B brings to this, and why it crosses a line is because, and I think it's right in line with what she's saying about everything being upside down and these things being misused, and particularly sexuality being misused, is that it because this is all about power. It's like my wet ass pussy will bring you to the door. Like I will I will have power over you. Like it has nothing to do with sex. It has nothing to do with it has nothing to do with, kind of the let's get it on kind of thing. Like it's not romantic. It's not even sexy like the way, it's not even, and it's not even playful. It is all like everything. You read those lyrics, it's all just this it's almost a spell to an incantation to power over. And
yeah.
like that's the difference. Like to me, that's the gear shift that we're, and to have national public radio, NPR, like the stuffy guys in turtlenecks kind of come out and say that was the song of the year, when at the same time, I mean, and I mean, I know this is overdone, and it's not just, and because, and I hope you can hear, and people can hear what I'm saying. This isn't just moralism that I'm talking about. I mean, I really think it's a misattribution, a misuse of really sacred things or really important things, and into really different appetites. And it's different. And I mean, it is different.
It is different, and
It's
dated
not,
back.
it's not,
Not 19. It's not the Rolling Stones. It's not
right.
Sticky
Yeah.
Fingers. It's
Yeah.
not. Yeah. No.
So,
So, maybe to close up, one thing that the anthroposophical world emphasizes is that these beings, these Luciferic beings and these Ahrimanic beings, they're inside of you. You are a host for these
sure.
beings, and you always will be.
Right.
And in fact, the point of Ahriman is to bring you into material being. That's what it does. And then the Lucifer gives you a sense of individuality. But there is, if those beings are not kept in some kind of balance, then bad things happen. And the balance would be the Christ.
Right.
Now, Artie Torrison and Robert Sardello, they often will say that that word gets so misunderstood that sometimes it's okay to just say it's the heart. But the heart, of course, is an iconography of, of feeling and the center of the being and love. And what I see now is with the drugs, I'm always quoting Richard Walter when he talks about a certain kind of psychopathology that's about intimacy without vulnerability, which is what you're talking about. It's about power.
Right.
And I'm never vulnerable. And so we have drugs now that, like speed is the great example, is it takes this center pillar, this place where the Christ can be, and it just takes it completely out of the game.
Right.
And so now you are just will forces and thinking and
You're a
sensuality.
bag of appetites. Yep.
You're just, yeah. And it's a predatory appetite.
Yep. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
nothing in you that can be vulnerable. But the scary thing is there's nothing in these people that wants to be vulnerable.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of people now that are aspiring, not even just drug addicts. There are a lot of people that are aspiring to an invulnerability. I don't want to be vulnerable to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a great book. Maybe we should really think about getting into some of her more theological stuff together.
Yeah, I that would be neat. That's because this is, I think, that she really, like, I am impressed with it because of the fact that she manages to, man, she threads a lot of needles. And I think, and manages to talk about kind of where I started, the war behind the war, kind of the structures that are feeding, the influences that are feeding these structures that we're contending with right now. And I just, I'm yeah, that would be neat. That would be a neat experience to, um, so yeah, she ends with it. She ends the book with like one of the, towards the end, she says, we should be conscious of this, that when he fights, then when we fight, we should fight for this God within by beginning to direct his or her own view, and possibly that of his fellow human beings, to this God within. To talk about that heart center, or that Christ center, that, to fight for to fight for Christ at the center, to fight for the heart, our heart center. Like that is where the fight is, and again, I think of Solzhenitsyn, that, the line between heaven and hell, it runs down through the middle of the human heart.
Yep.
That here we are, here we are. And it rightly does, it rightly does.
And Steiner would say, or he is saying, that to fight for the God within is the same thing as to fight for your humanity.
Yeah.
And the humanity of those.
To fight for humanity. Oh, see, that's, yeah, gosh, yeah. We can't do better than that.
All right, Reverend.
Thank you, Doctor.
We did it.
Peace and grace.
To you too.